No pressure. No pressure. We're live.
Nice.
Uh,
Hi.
so, hey, I'm Jam, and this is Jam's virtual Drupal Camp on the Acquia podcast. Today I'm with Rob Bayliss, the CTO of Last Call Media. Rob and I got to talking a few weeks ago in New York City about some work that they've been doing at Last Call that I found really, really exciting. Involves Drupal 8, involves CMI, and we're going to get to that in a little while. But first, I am going to give Rob the tough questions about who he thinks he is and what he thinks he's doing Drupal. Rob, can you handle it?
I think so. Let's give it a shot.
They're going to be total softballs. So,
Nice. Those are the ones I like.
so what's your first Drupal memory, Rob?
My first Drupal memory is getting thrown into a site build that had gone horribly wrong and needing to turn that around. So I came to Drupal pretty painfully, and it's been nothing but gravy ever since.
Right. When was that? And what version of Drupal was it?
That was 4.5 years ago, and that was early Drupal 6. It was a client website that we took on, and sort of the scope was ever changing, and things had kind of spun out of control there. And so, yeah, it was definitely a deep dive.
And I'm glad to hear that never ever happens anymore. So that's
Nope.
awesome.
Yep. Everything has been perfect.
So compare Drupal now to Drupal back then.
Well, Drupal now is a lot more mature. Of course, we're much more focused on the enterprise workflow and making things comfortable for big companies. Definitely, things are more stable, especially with contrib. There used to be this thing where you would upgrade your contrib modules and everything would break. That still happens a bit, but in general, we have a very stable core group of contrib modules that are ready for production and won't break from version to version. Of course, there are still exceptions to that, but yeah, it just seems like a much more stable, mature product than it used to be, and it's a lot more flexible in terms of what you can do from the interface.
So after almost 5 years of being a Drupal professional, what's your favorite thing about Drupal?
My favorite thing about Drupal is that it's a blank slate. As a developer, I have the ability to create this website that could be something totally different for each client. So, we have clients that just do sort of the editorial workflow thing, and that's what they need out of their website, and Drupal handles that perfectly. We have clients that do some more involved things with, say, e-commerce. For example, my favorite client is probably our retail store that we're sort of affiliated with. It's called Left Click Computers, and one of the things that we did for them was create an e-commerce website with the addition of a point-of-sale system built into Drupal. So, I mean, it can scale from a basic publishing workflow all the way up to, enterprise news, and then over to all these weird niches in commerce. So, yeah, it's the flexibility, I think, more than anything that I love about Drupal.
Wow, so you've got Drupal integrated with a physical cash register system. Did I understand that right?
Yeah, that's right. We maintain two modules, one for UberCart called Uber POS, and yeah, I mean, obviously, unfortunate name, but we went on to call the commerce version Commerce POS.
Fair's fair, right?
Fair is fair, yep. And we know might not be the easiest system to use, but it is a point-of-sale system that integrates with Drupal, and it's capable of doing things like printing receipts, opening cash drawers, accepting barcode scans, and stuff like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, what's your favorite Drupal module?
Favorite Drupal module? CTools.
CTools,
Yeah.
because?
Because it gives me a lot of APIs that I wish Drupal core had, and Drupal core does have in Drupal 8. The other cool thing about CTools is it's sort of a breeding ground for the next generation of technology. So, for example, a lot of the export stuff and the plugin stuff found its way into CMI and the plugin infrastructure for Drupal 8. And a similar thing happened with Drupal 7. A lot of the CTools Ajax APIs found their way into the Ajax framework that we use now.
So it's like a test bed for future development, right? A sort of a working sandbox within the system.
Yep, exactly. And I mean, it's a good chance for Contrib to sort of develop and leverage these systems, and it's a good way. If you use CTools and you make your module depend on CTools, you can be pretty sure that there's going to be an upgrade path there as well.
Okay. Talk about, so in thinking about this context where you have a system that you can use and then, it's to build websites, right? But actually you can use it to run point of sale machines and open the cash drawer, and you can use it to run media sites and there are so many things, right?
Sure.
It's so extensible because it's modular and because it's standard-based, but it's open source, right? That gives us a bunch of superpowers, I like to say. Talk about being an open source software developer.
Yeah.
Or maybe even an open source business.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, I think that obviously the benefit of being an open source software developer is that you're able to integrate and sort of communicate with the community in a much more deeper way. You definitely need to ask for feedback on a lot of things from the community, and everything sort of becomes democratic in that way, in that everyone has a say in things. I really appreciate that if I find a bug, I can fix it, patch it, submit the patch, and that'll get integrated in the future. On the flip side of that, of course, is the fact that there isn't a company that's necessarily obligated to fix these bugs for us. So as a community, we have a responsibility to contribute back, and there's a lot of responsibility in being a business that uses Drupal to make it better for everybody. And that's one of the things that I really love, but it can be difficult if your company culture isn't so open. We definitely, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but having recently relaunched our website on Drupal 8, there were a lot of things that were totally broken because it's not a stable release yet, and we were able to contribute those fixes back upstream. And it's been really fun to sort of get involved in that way and be one of the people that's building the next thing, and that's what I love about the open source community.
Cool. So, what are you most excited about in Drupal 8 then?
Oh man. Well, I guess that is kind of a softball because configuration management is what I'm most psyched about.
We'll get right to that.
Yeah. No, I mean it's just really nice to have a system that's built into core for the purpose of deploying these changes, and not to have to rely on a module that really wasn't built to do that, meaning the features module.
Well, let's go into CMI for a second, and why don't you explain it to us what CMI is, but not in terms of the widgets and the bells and the whistles and its specific functionality, more than saying, what it is, but how that benefits developers and Drupal businesses like yours and your end clients.
Sure. So at its core, what it does is it gives developers a way to store configuration in a way that's deployable. So it's basically just an API. Behind it, what that actually means for the end user and the clients is that as developers, we're able to create these features, or as site builders, let's say, we're able to create these different parts of your website and actually move that stuff around very easily from environment to environment. So that's something that the Drupal community has dealt with for a long time in a couple of different ways. You know, we've had update hooks and we've had all these different mechanisms, but to have a core way of doing it and a unified way that makes sense is going to be huge in terms of the enterprise deployment workflow.
Right, so it's going to be faster, and it's going to be simpler, and therefore it's going to be cheaper. And I also guess that faster and simpler make it more reliable too.
Yep, less chance of something going wrong. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the bit that I told you not to say, of course, is that configuration in Drupal 8 is contained essentially in a set of text files, and because it's just text and not in the database anymore like it has been through Drupal 7, we can copy paste it into from a known environment into another known environment, and it just works. So we can use version control, we can back it up, we can send it around, and the other technique that you didn't mention beyond update hooks and features was Angie Byron's claim to have done that with configuration notes on a napkin. So.
Yep, that's definitely, that's where everyone starts. If you're going to be leveraging two different environments, you start by clicking through both of them and doing it the painful way.
So, how do you feel about Drupal 8 integrating so many things from other open source projects and really uniting so many open source communities and introducing new kinds of compatibility?
I'm really psyched about it. I think that the PHP community is making huge leaps forward right now with the new tools that are available to us. Certainly Symfony is huge in that, but also a lot of the libraries that have really grown out of having Composer and PSR0 and being able to share code back and forth. That used to be really hard, and now it's not. And it's great to see that Drupal is taking notice of that and integrating that into our system, so we don't end up rebuilding everything as we have tended to do in the past. This is, it's very different for us, but I think that the potential is huge, and it gives us, we are an open source community, and it makes sense to combine with these other bigger communities as well. So there's a real synergy that happens there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So this is the point at which the podcast listeners are going to get viciously cut off from the recording. So thank you very much for giving us some insights into your background and what you do with Drupal. Podcast listeners, go ahead and look at the page onto which I will have, in the future that we're talking in, posted this podcast to. The session video will be embedded there, as will a copy of Rob's slides for you to look at. And so thank you so much, Rob, for taking the time to talk with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Now we cut to you doing your session. So I got really, really excited. You are maybe the third company, I guess, I've spoken with in any detail about their brand spanking new Drupal 8 site. I had a really nice conversation with a couple people from Sensio Labs in the UK. Richard Miller and Tom Kitchen told me how they built a Drupal 8 site for sensiolabs.co.uk exactly a year ago, so extremely bleeding edge, and they had some fun stories. That's on a previous podcast. Check that out. Amazy Labs in Switzerland is also running a Drupal 8 site now. But I got really excited that you wanted to talk in New York about how you guys are using CMI for a development and production workflow already.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what you're going to tell us about today.
That's exactly it. Yep.
Okay, cool. I am going to shut off my mic and get out of your way. And welcome to Jam's Drupal Camp, Rob.
Thank you. All right. Well, let me switch over to the slides here. And are you still with me? Everyone can see these slides, I hope.
That looks good.
Great. All right. So yeah, as we mentioned, I'm speaking today about Drupal 8 development workflow and sort of how that is going to work in the next version of Drupal. My name is Rob Bayliss, and I'm the CTO at Last Call Media. We just recently rebuilt our website on Drupal 8, and so I think that's sort of where I'm coming from. We had to learn a lot of this stuff firsthand, and it was a little painful at times. So hopefully what you're going to get out of this presentation is how to avoid that pain. Yeah, quick background about me. I've been a developer since 2010, a Drupal developer since 2010. I'm huge into using features and a code-based development workflow, so that means never actually changing settings manually on a different environment. And as I mentioned, we built one of the first public-facing Drupal 8 sites at lastcallmedia.com. So I'd encourage people to go ahead and visit that if you want to see what it looks like. This presentation is absolutely alpha because everything changes very quickly in Drupal 8. I've had to revise these slides several times for changes that have been made, so take it with a grain of salt. We're going to talk about what configuration management is, how it's used in previous versions of Drupal, and how it's going to be used going forward. Let's see. All right, so let's start by getting a definition of what configuration management is, so we're all on the same page here. Configuration management is a tool to manage configuration in a declarative, versionable, and deployable way. So we're going to unpack this statement just a little bit because it is pretty dense. First of all, configuration management should be declarative. And what is declarative? Declarative actually means that you're describing what you want to achieve, not how to achieve it. So if we use an example here, I want someone to make me a sandwich. So if I use an imperative tone, imperative is the opposite of declarative, I would tell them to spread peanut butter on one slice of bread, set the slice of bread on a plate, face up, spread jelly on another slice of bread, place the second slice of bread. Well, you get the message. So basically, we're telling them exactly how to make that sandwich. So in this example, if the peanut butter is kept in a different cabinet or something like that, this whole thing falls apart. If we use an declarative statement to tell someone how to make a sandwich, we tell them there should be a sandwich on a plate in front of me in 5 minutes' time. It should have only peanut butter and jelly between the two slices of bread. We let them figure out how to make that sandwich, where to get the peanut butter, how to spread it on the bread, all that stuff. So this is very important in configuration management because you don't want your configuration to become dependent on too many things in your system. So the other thing about declarative statements, they don't rely on global state. So if we look at how some configuration management was done in Drupal 7, we have a hook views default views alter. So there's a hook views default views somewhere that declares this admin achievements view. And in our alter hook, we're using an if module exists statement to do some alterations. So that's not declarative because it it depends on whether the module views data export exists in the system. So the return value of calling the get default views function is going to change depending on what modules are enabled in the system. So for our purposes here, this definition works. Declarative means static. There's no conditional logic in your configuration declaration. So for example, YAML is a static language. There isn't any logic in it. All right, so the second part of our statement is that the configuration should be versionable. So that means that we're able to keep a historical record so that we can roll back later if we need to. So the easiest way for us to do this is to get our configuration into files so that we can use traditional version control systems, mostly Git, to manage that stuff, and then we can just use the same workflow that we use for the rest of our code. The last part of this statement, that configuration should be deployable. So that just means that it needs to be able to be moved between environments in an easy way. So again, if we can get it into files, we already have tools to move files around on the system, whether that's a git pull, an rsync, or whatever tools you use, FTP maybe, I have no idea. All right, so just going back to this definition, it's a tool to manage configuration in a declarative, versionable, and deployable way. So if we look at where we're coming from in Drupal 6 and Drupal 7, the main way to manage configuration was the features module. So the features module was built to package all these different disparate parts of Drupal configuration into module files. Features is good at a lot of things. It bundles your configuration into PHP code, and then it bundles that PHP code into hooks, and then bundles those hooks into modules. It's really cool in that it's almost plug and play. It just kind of sits on top of whatever your module's default data store is, which in most cases is database storage. So for example, when you have the node type table, Features is capable of managing the entries in that node type table using hooks, and you can revert back and forth between those versions. Features is also really bad in a lot of ways. Like we talked about, it uses PHP code, so it's not fully declarative. It requires invoking hooks to read configuration, so it kind of creates this chicken and the egg situation where if your configuration defines anything that would alter the way a hook is run, you sort of have a dependency problem there. It also requires the creation of modules, which bloats your code base and increases the amount of code that needs to run on every page request. So the downside of it being plug and play, in addition to what core provides, is that it's not core, and there's not really a standardized way of doing things. And let's be totally honest about this. It's not at all usable for non-developers. It's really hard to explain to a non-developer how to package a feature, how to actually, what you need to put in there. It's a very complex process. So features is the tool we have had. It's not the tool that we have now. Drupal 8's config system is a little different. It is simply a key value store allowing complex configuration objects to be stored in a declarative, versionable, and deployable way. Again, I'm going to unpack this statement so we know exactly what this means. So when we talk about something being a key value store, it means that every piece of configuration in the store has a unique name. So you can see here I have a directory that contains YAML files, and if we're looking for the bardic.settings configuration, it's pretty simple. It's kept in the bardic.settings YAML file. If we talk about configuration objects, what does that mean? That means that each piece of configuration that you have in your key value store can be arbitrarily complex. So if we're looking at the user.settings configuration object, you can see on the left here that it's got a number of different keys and values within it. So you have what's the admin role for this site? Well, it's administrator role. On the right, you can see how we would actually use this thing in code. You call Drupal and then the static method config to get the user.settings config object back. And then you can call the get method to get different keys out of this object. So the important thing to note here is that each object within the key value store can consist of many different things. It can have a number of values below it. All right, so then if we talk about the storage of these things, this is a pretty recent change. There are two different storage mechanisms in core now. So the storage mechanism is swappable. You can use either the database storage or the file storage. There's also the concept of what's called the active storage and the staging storage. And so I'm going to talk about the difference between these two. So the active store technically it can be either database storage or file storage, same with the staging. But out of the box, it's going to come as database storage. So active storage is your current configuration. The database storage keeps it in a 2-column config table, and you can probably guess that the left column is the key and the right column is the value. So one thing about the active store, you should never, ever, ever change, that shouldn't say files, but it should actually say values in the active store, but never change anything in there directly. It's akin to killing kittens or hacking core, which are obviously the same things. So this is a snapshot of what that table looks like in SQL Pro. You can see that we've got a number of different keys on the left side there, and then on the right we've got just regular old PHP serialized objects. All right, so the other storage that Drupal comes with is the staging storage. Staging is a place to store configuration before it's imported. Out of the box, your staging storage in Drupal 8 is going to be file storage, so that would be YAML files. And one cool thing about the active staging concept is that any changes between the staging store and the active store can be visualized, and you can revert the changes. So if we look at how this compares with features in, say, Drupal 7, over here we can see that the features model keeps things in probably multiple database tables. Really, we don't know what the storage is for features because each module uses something different. It might be the node type table or it might be somewhere else. So that's the active storage. The staging storage is feature modules, so just modules on your file system. For the Drupal 8 configuration API, the config table is going to store all of your active config, so it's all kept in one place. Really nice if you want to, just find out what's in there. And then the staging store is going to be your staging directory, which by default is kept inside of the files directory. So it's a much simpler model in Drupal 8. Everything is kept in one of two places, either the config table or the staging directory. So again, going back to this definition, the config system is just a key value store, allowing complex configuration objects to be stored in a declarative, versionable, and deployable way. And going back to the earlier definition, declarative, versionable, and deployable means YAML files on your file system. So let's, now that we have the definitions down, we're going to take a look at how to actually use this system. It's not really that hard, so let's get right into it. So for this exercise, we're going to use two instances of the same Drupal 8 site. I set one up and called it dev, and then I cloned the database and created a new Drupal site with it. So the first one obviously is called dev, and the second one is called prod. They're completely stock Drupal 8 sites, nothing fancy about them. So step one, we're going to change some stuff. You can see here that I'm on the dev site. I'm going to set the site name to the most interesting site in the world and just save that form. So that essentially enacts a configuration change on our system. As soon as we save that form, that configuration was written into the active store in the database. Step two is that we're going to export all the config for this site. So if we think about it, because we started production from a database clone of dev, they should be exactly in sync to begin with. So if we export the configuration from dev, now that we've changed the site name, we're going to download that file, and then we're going to switch tabs over to the production site. Here you can see that I've uploaded the tar file that I got from the dev site, and I'm going to hit that upload button. And so what that's going to do is import the full config into our staging store. The next step is that we go to the Synchronize tab, and we can see when we look at the Synchronize tab that the system.site configuration has changed. And if we hit the the View Differences button here, it'll pop up this nice overlay where we can see that the configuration went from, or the site name went from site install to the most interesting site in the world. It's a much catchier name. So when I hit this Import All button here, it's going to enact my staging changes onto the active store, and it's going to change the site name. So simple as that, we've moved all the configuration from dev to production. So if we just sort of summarize what happened here, we're going to export from the dev active store by downloading that tarball. We're going to import it to the production staging store by uploading the tarball there. And then we're going to sync the production staging store to the production active store to make those changes live. So that's a pretty simple workflow, and that's really easy to do. That comes out of the box in Drupal 8. Now, so that's a good example, but probably not how most of us are going to be using configuration management in Drupal 8. Most of us are probably going to be using version control to do it. So we're going to set up pretty much the same thing, but we need to do some preparation before we begin here. So first we're going to open up our settings.php, and we're going to move the configuration directory, the staging directory, to somewhere outside of the files directory. Now the reason for this is that we all know we don't want to put our files directory under version control. So we need to move it to some place that we don't mind having under version control. I like to use site's default config for that, but I don't think there is a best practice for this at the moment. So I'm going to try and start it right now. Let's try site's default config. So the directory is site's default config staging. And so just making that change is enough to cause Drupal to recognize that as your staging store. Step two is that we're going to download that entire config tarball and expand it into the staging directory. So you can see here that I've moved all those YAML files into my staging directory, the one that I created in site's default config. Step 3 is that we're going to add the staging directory and commit it to version control. So that's the initial commit of those configuration files. And that's it. So now we go back to actually using our workflow. So you can see here I've just changed the site slogan. I don't always, but when I do, blah, blah, blah. So that's on dev. We're going to export the config using the same mechanism, the download mechanism, and unzip it to staging. And I like to use this command here, the tar command, to unzip it. So now if we do a git status, this is assuming we're using git, of course. If we do a status command for whatever your version control is, you should see that there's one file changed, and it's the system.site YAML file. So that makes perfect sense since we changed the slogan. So we're going to add it to version control, and then we're going to commit it and push it. And then in the next step, we're going to go to the production site, and we're going to pull it down. Over in the browser, if we take a look, we can see that the Synchronize tab now shows one change. And if I were to click that View Differences tab, I would see that it's the slogan that's changed. So this mechanism is exactly the same as the other one in the way that it moves things into your staging store. So just to summarize the workflow here, what we're doing is we're copying our development site's active store to the development site's staging store, committing and pushing that into version control, and then we're pulling on our production end, and that puts it in the staging directory, and then there's a synchronization step that needs to happen as well, where you pull it into the active store. And so that synchronization step does a lot of different things, but basically it allows your configuration or your Drupal site to react to whatever's happening with the configuration changes. And that could be something as simple as just changing the site slogan, in which case nothing else really needs to change on the site, or it could be adding a new field, in which case those database tables need to change. You need to add, a whole database table for the field. So that's why you can never change things directly in the active store. Your site needs to be able to react to those changes as they're imported. A couple of tips for dealing with this. First of all, when you're copying your active config to the staging directory, you should delete all your files that are in the staging directory currently. And the reason for that is that if one of your config values gets removed in the active store and you just copy those straight over the staging files, that won't be reflected in your configuration. The second thing to consider is file access permissions for your config directories. I don't really have great advice for this right now. Drupal wants that staging store to be writable by the web server, but I'm not sure if that's going to end up being the case or not. The reason that staging directory should be writable by the web server is that otherwise you wouldn't be able to upload the tarball and use the configuration system that way. So for now, just make sure that every time you git pull, that you change the ownership of everything in the staging store over to the web user. The last workflow that I want to just briefly mention here is the Drush workflow. And let's be totally honest, this is the one that all of us want to use. None of us probably want to use the download and replace method. This is really similar to how features updates used to work in Drupal 7. So in Drupal 7, you had the option to either download the feature using the interface and replace the whole directory, or you could use Drush FU to do it. I think all of us probably preferred Drush, but it's a matter of taste. So the Drush command to do this exact workflow is on the dev site. You're going to do drush config export, and then the destination. So staging corresponds to site's default config staging. So that's the first two steps here. It's going to move your configuration from active to staging. And then after you do your git pull or git commit, git pull, push, and then git pull to production, on production you can use drush config import staging. And again, that's just saying where are you importing from? That's the staging argument there. So that takes your configuration from the production staging folder and moves it into the active store and enacts all of those changes. All right, so just to kind of wrap all this up, if there's one big thing that I could impart here, it's that the configuration system in Drupal 8 is not features. Features had a really specific purpose when it was first built, which is packaging certain things together in a way that made sense for them to be reusable between sites. It wasn't really made for single site deployment. So Drupal 8 configuration, the configuration API is really meant for single site deployment. You don't need to worry about packaging anything together. You don't need to worry about which pieces go in which buckets or anything like that. So you really have to think of it a little bit differently. You're going to be working with an entire site's configuration at once rather than working with chunks of it. And the other thing that's different is that you don't need to worry about excluding things from features in Drupal 8. So, for example, in Drupal 7, there were certain variables that if you somehow managed to get them into, let's say, StrongArm, and put them into a feature, your site would just implode. One example of that is the node last cron, or the cron run for the search on the node search. So stuff like that has been moved into separate APIs in Drupal 8. There's now a state API which is specific to each instance of the site. And so everything that's in config can now be moved around very easily back and forth. So you don't need to worry about excluding certain pieces. The flip side of that is that you need to be really, really careful about what you're actually reverting on your production site. I would definitely suggest making configuration for your production instances read-only, at least until there's an easy way to revert individual pieces of configuration. And the reason for that is that, let's say you had changed your site name on production, that configuration could be overwritten just by hitting the Import All button on the Synchronize tab. So definitely be very careful when using this system right now. If you have changes being made on production, you need to be very mindful about moving those back into code as soon as possible. So that's about it for my presentation. I think we're going to open it up for questions now. And I think there are some questions in the background here.
In fact, I was just asking the crowd about that, and the only response we've got so far is that, in fact, this is all perfectly clear, which is, an amazingly nice thing about CMI, right? It's got, I don't know, the reduction in complexity for the power regain is hard to. Well, you've done it for real now, right? How does it feel for real compared to the theory?
It feels butter smooth. Once you get everything under version control and you're actually moving things around, everything just works. It's actually pretty miraculous. There was sort of a incident where configuration couldn't depend on the other pieces of configuration for a while. So, for example, if you enabled a module and enabled a field that that module provided, things could break horribly. That stuff has been worked out, and it's really, really nice to use. I don't know. I mean, it's a far cry from sort of how difficult features could be at times.
You had a practically nostalgic look on your face there for a second.
You know, I'm going to miss working with features sometimes. There's something very zen about how you bundle things and putting things in the right buckets. But at the same time, I think we're all better off for not having to explain that to someone else. It's kind of nice to know how to do, but not nice to do it. Oh.
Right, there's all sorts of skills that we learned in our lives that are tricky to learn, and you're really satisfied that you can do it really well, but then actually when life moves on, you know, maybe and you don't have to anymore, that's okay too, right?
Definitely. Yeah, I think I'll always look back fondly on the good old days of features, but you know, I should mention here, there's one important thing, which is features isn't going away. It's actually going to be a much simpler module in Drupal 8, and it's going to go back to its original purpose, which is bundling configuration pieces together. So, yeah, no need to worry about that. It's going to essentially be for distributions. For example, you know, like OpenAtrium utilizes it pretty heavily to make things that are repeatable across different sites that are just configuration.
All right, Rob, thank you so much. Please give us your shameless pitch. Oh, hey, wait, stop. Everyone hold. Nick LePage. Hey, Nick. Nick has a question. It is very clear. In the unlikely event of changing configuration in production, is it still going to be best practice to only push stuff from dev upwards, or will this system allow for pushing config, such as block config, etc., up to the version control system by end users?
Yeah, CMI has no knowledge of your version control system, so there's no way for Drupal to add and commit that change. If you were to go to production and, let's say, use the configuration export Drush command to move things from active to staging, which should be totally safe, then you could then add and commit those changes there. But yes, Drupal has no knowledge of your version control system.
All right, on your head be it, Nick, I guess.
Yep.
Cool. So, Rob, please give us a shameless plug for you, for Last Call Media,
Sure.
Whatever's on your mind.
Sure. Well, I guess the main thing that I would say is go visit our website. We put a lot of time and effort into it, and I think it's really beautiful. Look for Easter eggs coming soon. That'll hopefully motivate us to put them in.
All right. Then, lastcallmedia.com.
Lastcallmedia.com, yes.
Live and in Drupal 8 now.
Yep.
Cool. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Come back. There is another Jams Drupal Camp session on in something like 2.5 hours, and there are 3 or 4 more this week. Some really, really interesting stuff coming up. Look on my Google Plus profile. They're all listed there. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thanks again, Rob, for presenting. We will talk soon. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.